really honored to announce that we are working on a Cyberpunk game, but not just a regular Cyberpunk game, on the Cyberpunk game. That's really important to stress. And the game is based on Mike Pondsmith's pen and paper RPG Cyberpunk system.
Cyberpunk 2077 was first announced in late May 2012 by CD Projekt co-founder Marcin Owinski during the company's summer conference. This new Cyberpunk game was untitled at the time, simply being referred to as the Cyberpunk game. CD Projekt Red was a somewhat small indie Polish developer back in 2012, with their previous releases The Witcher and The Witcher 2 Assassins of Kings having moderate success in terms of sales and reception. During this period of time, which was still the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 era of gaming, the hype and anticipation were for announced games like Rockstar's Grand Theft Auto 5, Irrational's BioShock Infinite, and Naughty Dog's interesting-looking survival horror title, The Last of Us. In gaming circles, there was also tons of excitement for the inevitable Half-Life 3 from Valve and Fallout 4 from Bethesda. CD Projekt Red in 2012 was simply a blip on a map. Of course, there was a loyal following for their Witcher games, but outside of Poland, this was very much an unknown studio. So when CD Projekt Red first announced this Cyberpunk project, there wasn't a ton of excitement, at least yet. But during the summer conference, CDPR did make some bold promises of what this upcoming Cyberpunk experience would offer players in terms of gameplay and narrative. It was to be a mature RPG, made for a mature audience, set in a futuristic, realistic, and brutal world. It was to feature a gripping, non-linear story with comparisons made to the books of William Gibson and Philip K. Dick. It was to have advanced RPG mechanics, a variety of different character classes, and a gigantic arsenal of weaponry. But it did not stop just there, as co-founder Marcin Owinski stated that they were setting up a second internal development team to start early production on this game, and he furthermore made additional promises of innovating and setting a new standard for the futuristic RPG genre in gaming with their Cyberpunk title.
I really promise that we'll deliver a truly outstanding futuristic RPG, setting totally new standard in the genre, both in terms of the gameplay, but also on the tech side. So it will be a cutting-edge looking game and exceptional on the gameplay with high production values. And I really want to say that we are not making a game for everyone. We are not making R for everybody. We are making a game for a mature audience. So you will get an intelligent, non-linear, gripping game with cutting-edge graphics. Well, what more could you want, guys?
I think it's safe to say at that moment in 2012, there probably was a lot of skepticism for those remarks, as this was a relatively small developer making huge promises at a time when the metaphorical stocks of BioWare and Bethesda game studios were through the roof. Two AAA developers which had established themselves as the top dogs of this gaming industry in terms of delivering exceptional fun and unique story-driven role-playing games. Now, during the summer conference reveal event, CD Projekt also brought out and announced that Cyberpunk creator Mike Pondsmith would be assisting in the development of this game. Pondsmith would explain the decision to partner up and work with CDPR on bringing his Cyberpunk franchise to the video game world.
Now, the thing is that's really hard to translate because you can't just make a gun and run game. You need to find a way to get that feeling. And for many, many years, we kind of despaired at ever finding a company that could help us do that, could pull that off. And when we were contacted by CD Projekt Red, we saw Witcher and Witcher 2. We said, yeah, these guys can do it. They can get that maturity, they can get that danger, they can get that romance, they can get that dystopian feel all in one place. And we've been looking forward to that, as with fans all around the world of Cyberpunk. They've been waiting for that. Now we're going to get it.
While CDPR was somewhat scarce on details of their new Cyberpunk game when unveiling it, not long after, in October of 2012, we would get an official title, Cyberpunk 2077. Then, just a few months later, the first teaser trailer would drop, one that received a lot of attention. Millions watched with curiosity, blown away by the visuals, and also very much interested in seeing what the CGI footage would evolve into. Overall, the intention of this teaser was to bring interest from gamers, but also potential talent that could contribute to the development of the ambitious Cyberpunk 2077. The teaser hinted at some aspects of the game, such as the setting of Night City, but also the vibe and vision that CDPR had for the story-driven RPG, with a focus being put on Night City's special police unit MaxTac, who were tasked with combating cyber psychos, individuals that lose their humanity when they overuse on implants or substances and then go on rampages. The teaser ended with a promise that the game was coming when it was ready. But around this time, even long before to be honest, many questions and articles were popping up about the company's more immediate future, and that was in regards to The Witcher 3. CDPR had two development teams working on AAA games, a much smaller one at the time on Cyberpunk 2077, and the other one on The Witcher 3, which was first unofficially announced within the Cyberpunk 2077 teaser trailer. While CDPR hinted at The Witcher 3's announcement coming in early February of 2013, they also included a secret message which was far more open and detailed about the company's future. It mentioned that The Witcher 3 would be a fully open world game with an intense story that was much closer to being completed, being announced in February. And for Cyberpunk 2077, it was also to be an open world game scheduled at the time for a release sometime in 2015 or when it was done. CDPR promised to only release Cyberpunk 2077 when they would be convinced it is quote-unquote nothing but pure, refined, unadulterated awesome. We want it to be the most kick-ass futuristic RPG ever. Okay, maybe this sounds pretty bully, but it is our actual goal. You judge if we deliver it. The secret message and teaser trailer really set the stage for the hype and anticipation surrounding Cyberpunk 2077. But things would start to go quiet on this project as the focus turned to The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, the next game coming from CD Projekt Red, which was indeed announced on February 5th of 2013. The Witcher 3's development clearly did not go as smoothly as CDPR had envisioned, as the game suffered multiple delays, being first moved from the later half of 2014 to February of 2015. At the time, CD Projekt president and co-CEO Adam Kaczynski talked to Polish financial journalists telling them about the decision to not rush out The Witcher 3 early. Kaczynski said, "The market is afraid of badly polished games on next-gen platforms, which is why CDPR felt that gamers understood their decision to delay." But he further added, "We know what to do, we just have to do it. We don't want to release the game with bugs that undermine the gameplay." The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt would again be delayed from February to May 19th, 2015 because of this reason, as was revealed in Jason Schreier's book Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. After seeing the backlash that Ubisoft faced with Assassin's Creed Unity, which suffered from a myriad of bugs, CDPR did not want to do that. The game's scope had expanded over the years, so much passion and hours of work went into this game, and CD Projekt Red wanted this to be as polished as possible. So when it did release, it still suffered a number of issues, and many accused the developer of misleading the public by downgrading the graphics. Regardless, The Witcher 3 was a massive success, the game that put this Polish developer on the map. It also included a nice little Easter egg teasing at the developer's next big project.
The world where Eridan couldn't find you. What was it like?
You wouldn't believe me if I told you.
Try me.
People there had metal in their heads, waged war from a distance, using things similar to megascopes. And there were no horses. Everyone had their own flying ship instead.
Siri, stop fooling around.
Told you wouldn't believe me.
Geralt of Rivia's big finale earned CD Projekt Red universal praise, millions of sales and hundreds of awards, including some big victories at the Game Awards later that year. CDPR would win Developer of the Year, Game of the Year, and Best RPG of the Year, beating out Bethesda Game Studios' Fallout 4, a game that I think many were convinced after its announcement at E3 2015 that it would sweep the Game Awards, but that did not happen. If anything, CDPR stole their thunder by delivering arguably one of the greatest video games of all time, my personal favorite of the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 console generation. Even more impressive, The Witcher 3's success continued after launch, as developer CDPR showered players in free DLC, and then two very affordable expansion packs that could rival that of many full $60 AAA experiences in terms of quality and content. The Witcher 3 journey, though, did come to a close on May 31st, 2016, with the release of the Blood and Wine expansion. Even before then, the focus at the studio had already shifted to Cyberpunk 2077. 2077, a game that wasn't very far into development. As was reported by Eurogamer in August of 2015, only about 50 developers had been working on the game as of 2013, shortly after its announcement. The game was in pre-production. Even then, the statistic is a bit misleading, as John Mameas, head of CD Projekt Red's Krakow studio, revealed in May 2016 that towards the middle of development on The Witcher 3, they decided to move the majority of developers from Cyberpunk 2077 back onto the Wild Hunt. So what that meant was that Cyberpunk 2077 essentially was put to the side for a long time as the developer put all of its resources to perfecting The Witcher 3. But in June 2015, that changed. CD Projekt co-founder Marcin Nowinski told IGN that the core team is working The Witcher 3 expansions, but more and more people are moving over onto Cyberpunk. By the end of the year, the game was finally in full production, with the majority of the CD Projekt Red team moving their attention to the world of Cyberpunk. Interestingly, following the release of The Witcher 3 Blood and Wine expansion at the end of May 2016, it appears that Cyberpunk 2077's development leadership was shaken up a bit, with the original game director, Matusz Kenek, who had been supposedly leading development from March 2012 to June of 2016, now serving as one of the game's design directors. But as work on Cyberpunk 2077 was finally fully underway, one of the big changes that the development team realized early on was an upgrade, or really an overhaul of their game engine, was necessary to make their ambitious vision of Night City possible. In May 2016, CDPR's visual effects artist Jose Teixeira stated, "We're upgrading the engine. It's a pretty thorough upgrade. Almost every aspect of the engine is getting upgraded. My particle effects editor is getting upgraded, as is almost every other tool." Throughout 2015 and 2016, CD Projekt Red staff conducted a couple of interviews here and there, emphasizing their sky-high expectations for their next game. Jose Teixeira saying in October of 2015 that Cyberpunk 2077 is far, far bigger than The Witcher 3. Adam Kaczynski saying in December of 2015 that the project is even more ambitious than we first planned. In March 2016, CDPR studio head Adam Badowski said Cyberpunk 2077 has to be even better, even bigger, even more revolutionary than originally intended. In May 2016, Marcin Nowinski said that The Witcher 3 set a certain bar and we definitely cannot go lower. In November 2016, John Mameas said Cyberpunk 2077 will be really effing badass. By the time 2017 rolled around, the CDPR team had expanded drastically. The Witcher 3 had 250 in-house staff by the end of its development, and Cyberpunk 2077 was to have double that. In June 2017, though, disaster struck the project, as CD Projekt Red published a statement confirming that internal files were being held for ransom by an individual or individuals who had illegally obtained early design documents of Cyberpunk 2077 and were threatening to publish them online. CDPR's response was not giving in to the demands, contacting the appropriate authorities and confirming the documents were largely old and unrepresentative of the current vision of the game. Later that year, around September, more controversy would strike the game as attention and concern began to surround supposed negative employee reviews of the company on the website Glassdoor, painting the developer as a giant mismanaged mess in which developers were being severely overworked and leaving the company in droves because they could not handle the dysfunctional work environment. Throughout the month of September 2017, CDPR would lose multiple high-ranking developers: lead level designer Matusz Piaskiewicz, senior gameplay producer Derek Patterson, project manager Ovidiu Train Vasilescu, and senior art producer Mikhail Stek all left the company that month. In October 2017, CD Projekt Red directly responded to the Glassdoor reviews by taking a very firm stance on how they go about game development and downplayed recent departures. The Polish studio in a statement emphasized that their way of making games is not for everyone, as it requires conscious effort and a lot of faith, commitment, and spirit. They additionally explained that they set out to reinvent the wheel every frickin' time with their games. In the weeks following this statement, YouTubers such as Young Ye and The Mad Queen Show would upload videos citing multiple inside CD Projekt Red sources, which made clear that all was not well at the studio. The most startling revelation was just how many developers were quitting after each new game's release. This created questions about sustainability for the rising independent developer. After The Witcher 3, though, CD Projekt Red earned a lot of goodwill with the gaming community, truly leading by example with their business model, which was extremely fair and honest. Now, while the company was dealing with concern and skepticism about how they treat employees and go about game development, they also saw a huge reputation boost in November of 2017 by directly taking aim at the greed of publisher Electronic Arts, who was in the midst of one of the biggest gaming disasters ever with a loot box debacle of Star Wars Battlefront Battlefront 2. So when YouTube channel Pretty Good Gaming reported on November 18th, 2017 about the developer maybe toying around with the idea of making Cyberpunk 2077 a games as a service, CDPR directly responded by refuting the claims, saying, "Worry not. When you think Cyberpunk 2077, think nothing less than The Witcher 3, huge single-player, open-world, story-driven RPG, no hidden catch, you get what you pay for, no BS, just honest gaming like with Wild Hunt. We leave greed to others." That last sentence a clear reference to Electronic Arts' disastrous, slimy business plan with Star Wars Battlefront 2 that backfired in their face. Furthermore, CD Projekt Red sent a private message to Pretty Good Gaming which elaborated on their public statement and again made another promise to not be greedy and not worry. We want to be transparent towards everyone, gamers and investors alike, and while we never want to do any harm to the way we communicate with gamers, we have to talk to investors, preferably in their own language, because we're a public company. During these investor chats, our focus naturally gravitates towards financial issues, but nothing ever changes in our approach towards gamers. We are fully aware that our gamer-centric thinking about development is what allowed us to grow as a studio, and that gamers are the force of nature propelling us forward. Thanks for the care you showed by creating your video, but please don't be afraid. There's no need to remind us not to be greedy, because changing this industry for the better has been a part of our soul for the last decade, if not more. Regarding Cyberpunk 2077, please be patient. It will be ready when it's done, and we sure as hell won't release it because of fiscal year's ending. On June 10th, 2018, the official Cyberpunk 2077 Twitter account showed life for the first time in years. After revealing the game's teaser trailer 5 years ago, on that same day, CDPR was finally preparing to talk and reveal Cyberpunk 2077 to the world. The tweet was short but significant. It was a simple beep. A few days later, corroborating a report that I made at the time, gaming website Game Pressure revealed, citing sources, that a new trailer for Cyberpunk 2077 was to be shown at E3 2018, along with a playable demo behind closed doors to the press. A month later, on February 15th, 2018, CD Projekt co-founder Marcin Nowinski would discuss in an interview with PC Gamer the Star Wars Battlefront 2 loot box debacle that had broken news headlines just a few months prior. Nowinski again made clear his company was siding with gamers. Conversation sounds way too nice to describe what was happening last year. I would rather call it community backlash. And this time around, it wasn't just the hardcore community. There was a lot of really pissed off gamers out there, and they decided to speak up. Where we stand is quite simple, and you could see it with all of our past releases, most recently The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt and Gwent. If you buy a full price game, you should get a big polished piece of content which gives you many hours of fun gameplay. The definition of many may vary on a title by title basis, but in our case, it was always 50 to 60 plus hours of the main storyline with up to a couple of hundred of hours of side activities if you really wanted to max out the title. To me, this is a fair deal. You get what you paid for, plus we are always trying our best to over-deliver. There's no better PR than a happy gamer recommending your title to their friends. Nowinski would further emphasize the need for developers and publishers to be more transparent with gamers, saying the moment they feel you are reaching out for their wallet in any unfair way, they will be vocal about it, and frankly speaking, I think it's good for the industry. Things often look great from a spreadsheet perspective, but decision makers often are not asking themselves the question of how would gamers feel, or is this offer a fair one? Gamers are striking back, and I really hope this will change our industry for the better. On April 23rd, 2018, gaming website Game Pressure dropped another report which leaked some shocking details about Cyberpunk 2077, such as the fact that the game would only be played from the first-person perspective, a detail that many gamers found hard to believe at the time. Game Pressure additionally mentioned a fragment of the game was to take place on the moon, and one of the features the studio is working on was wall running, similar to the gameplay mechanic from the Titanfall franchise. Fast forward to early June 2018, rumors and leaks began to emerge online which made clear a big Cyberpunk 2077 reveal was imminent. That reveal would finally happen at the end of Microsoft's E3 conference, in which CD Projekt Red quote-unquote hacked the showcase and gave fans the game's first real trailer. While much of the public was blown away by this reveal trailer, there was one individual that was a bit critical. William Gibson, one of the inspirations of the game, took to Twitter saying, "The trailer for Cyberpunk 2077 strikes me as GTA skinned over with a generic 80s retro future, but hey, that's just me." During E3 2018, this reveal was not the only thing that CD Projekt Red's team was showing off of Cyberpunk 2077, as the press and some lucky attendees got a 50-minute pre-alpha unedited walkthrough of the game. Impressions reactions went up shortly thereafter from games media, and they were overwhelmingly positive. These impressions did confirm one important detail, and that was the fact that Cyberpunk 2077 was indeed an FPS, a decision that many gamers felt disappointed by. On June 14th, 2018, in an interview with Eurogamer, Cyberpunk 2077 quest designer Patrick Mills explained why they were ditching the third-person perspective, saying, "In this game, we wanted to put you in the shoes and in the body of the character you're controlling, so you feel like this is your character. First person was the one way to do that. Additionally, you have a greater immersion, and we can do some environmental stuff from first person that you wouldn't be able to do in third person. If nothing else, I think it's going to be really cool when you're walking around the city and you look up, which is something that in third person doesn't really feel right. To really experience that verticality, you need a first person perspective." 1 week later, on June 21st, 2018, speaking to GamesIndustry.biz, co-founder Marcin Nowinski would discuss the extremely high expectations, saying, "We need to remain humble. Regardless of how successful our last game was, the next game is the one that we'll be proving ourselves with. That's how people will judge us. The Witcher 3 was amazing, I think I can objectively say that, but if we don't deliver on the promise and the really high expectations against Cyberpunk, everyone will be like, hey, what's up with you guys? Are you crap now? It's always quality and ambition driving us forward. We don't want to just do another sequel or a game based on the same mechanics. We want to innovate. We want to push the bar higher. That's what we're trying to do with Cyberpunk, and that's why it's taking so much time." Controversy would again strike CD Projekt Red just days before Gamescom 2018, as the official Cyberpunk Twitter account made a "did you assume my gender" joke, which did not go over well with games media and the internet. CDPR would immediately apologize. During the August Gamescom 2018 event, in an interview with Engadget, producer Richard Borzamowski confirmed the story of Cyberpunk 2077 was complete and the actual game was playable start to finish. But just days later, following Gamescom, which had yet another private showing of the impressive Cyberpunk 2077 gameplay demo shown to games media, there would be outcry from gamers online wanting the demo to be released for everyone to see. CD Projekt Red would eventually oblige. On August 27th, 2018, the 48-minute Cyberpunk 2077 walkthrough was uploaded online for everyone to view. The gameplay demo did have giant text that emphasized that this was a work in progress and would not represent the final look, but regardless, the footage was absolutely fascinating.
We've greatly enhanced our crowd and community systems to create the most believable city in any open-world game to date.
CD Projekt Red showed off a little bit of everything, introducing us to the world and our own customizable protagonist, V. There was some driving, some combat, some dialogue options, some story, some quests, some tension, some customization, some cyberware, and some of the open world. The gameplay demo overall looked revolutionary and like the next step forward in the open world genre of gaming. On December 13th, 2018, Kyle Rowley, the associate design director on Cyberpunk 2077, left CD Projekt Red, and a month later, Cyberpunk 2077 creative director Sebastian Stepin also left the studio. These were again high-profile departures, which certainly raised some eyebrows. The next significant update on Cyberpunk 2077 came in a unique way. It was in May of 2019 when CDPR studio head Adam Badowski and co-founder Marcin Nowinski reached out to Kotaku's Jason Schreier for an interview. This discussion was different. It was about finally changing for the better. The CD Projekt executives said that they wanted to be better towards their employees. They wanted less crunch and to treat them more humanely. They reached out to the man that exposes studios' exploitation of workers because they wished to make a public pledge that employees could hold them to. This was a step forward. They promised developers would not have to work weekends or nights. It's not mandatory. Neither executive would outright dismiss that overtime or crunch would happen, but they vowed to be better and to limit it as much as possible. However, Badowski would promise that the final hours of Cyberpunk 2077's development would be less crunchy. "I think we can promise that it'll be better than The Witcher's finishing period," Badowski said. Just a couple of weeks later, E3 2019 would happen. Again, Jason Schreier would talk with co-founder Marcin Nowinski, and again the executive would promise to not overwork developers. But at E3 2019, this would bring the next significant reveal of Cyberpunk 2077, again on the Microsoft E3 stage. This time, CD Projekt Red had yet another huge surprise for fans.
Please welcome Keanu Reeves.
Cyberpunk is set in a metropolis of the future, where body modification has become an obsession. You play as an outlaw, an enhanced mercenary working in the sleazy underbelly of the city. The feeling of being there, of walking the streets of the future, is really going to be breathtaking. You're breathtaking. You're all breathtaking.
Besides Keanu Reeves announcing his involvement in Cyberpunk 2077, portraying the established character Johnny Silverhand, the release date for the game was also finally announced, that being April 16th of 2020. Pre-order pages for the game would start going up with 2 editions being available, a standard one and a collector's edition. Neither edition included bonus exclusive DLC content, and a secret message discovered in the new cinematic trailer CDPR encouraged interested fans to pre-order and also teased that a new gameplay demo would be publicly released sometime around Gamescom. But in addition to the pre-order pages going up, we also received the official description of Cyberpunk 2077 that you play as V, a mercenary outlaw going after a one-of-a-kind implant that is the key to immortality. Once again, members of Games Media would get to see a new gameplay demo of Cyberpunk 2077 behind closed doors at E3 2019. This time though, there was controversy with a few outlets extremely critical of how some cultures were being featured in the game, as well as one in-game advertisement which was declared problematic and called into question trans representation. Cyberpunk creator Mike Pondsmith would blast gaming website Rock Paper Shotgun's criticism of the game's cultures, saying in a Reddit response that he was heavily involved in the development of Cyberpunk 2077, and that who the bleep do you think you are to tell me whether or not my creation was done right or not. CD Projekt Red would directly respond to the outrage over their controversial in-game trans poster, with having the artist behind it explaining its meaning. Art director Kazuya Redisuik telling Polygon, "This is all to show that much like in our modern world, hypersexualization and advertisements is just terrible. It was a conscious choice on our end to show that in this world, a world where you are a cyberpunk, a person fighting against corporations, that advertisement is what you're fighting against." In interviews that followed E3 2019, CD Projekt Red staff would confirm that much of the game's content was complete, and the focus at the studio was now shifting to mostly spending time on iterating, polishing it, playing it, and making sure it looks and feels the way we want. On August 30th, 2019, again CD Projekt Red obliged to gamers' demands of seeing the new gameplay demo publicly released, although this time it was heavily edited.
It was designed to be a tourist hotspot within the city. As you can see, this didn't pan out. When uncertainty struck the global economy, investors pulled their funding, leaving most establishments unfinished. It's one of those places where expectations and reality collided, resulting in a heap of disappointment.
The gameplay showed that CDPR had made some significant changes in the game's UI, but it also revealed new features and mechanics. This was our first opportunity to see the life path character creator system. We also got an introduction to a new boss fight, hacking, different playstyles, unique uses for cyberware, and skill customization. The reaction to this new footage was mostly positive. In early September 2019, CD Projekt Red confirmed that the game was almost entirely first person, and that most of the third person cutscenes as shown in the 2018 gameplay demo were now gone. The decision was described as being a creative one, for full immersion, but many fans voiced their displeasure on social media, believing that the developer was just trying to cut corners. In 2020, this was the big year, when the years of waiting would come to a close for fans. In mid-January, the Cyberpunk 2077 development suffered its first delay, moving the release date from April 2020 to September 2020. CD Projekt Red saying in a public statement that while the game was complete and playable, there was still work to be done. The extra time that they needed would ensure that they can make the game perfect. As was learned later after release in a report from Bloomberg, this statement was false and misrepresented the state of the game at the time. Employees at CDPR were rushing behind the scenes trying to meet unrealistic deadlines set by management. Following this January delay announcement, CDPR would go radio silent for the most part until the COVID-19 pandemic struck. On March 16th, the studio would go remote and cancel all in-person events. CDPR's executives would reassure investors developers in April that the global pandemic would not disrupt their plans for Cyberpunk 2077. CDPR was still confident in getting the game out in September, with the only difficulties expected to maybe be some localization efforts. By early May, things were starting to ramp up in marketing. CDPR would announce the first episode of their Night City Wire series coming June 11th, which would provide fans with an inside look at Cyberpunk 2077. In early June, Night City Wire Episode 1 was delayed until June 25th due to the massive protests and rioting over the death of George Floyd that was rocking the entire world. But on June 18th, CD Projekt Red came out with a statement and surprised everyone with delaying Cyberpunk 2077 for a second time, moving the game from September to November. And the yellow screen of death statement, which fans were starting to fear, CDPR's executives explained that the "ready when it's done" phrase is more than something they say, it's what they stand by, so they understood delaying the game an additional 2 months would bring internet backlash, but they felt it was the right move. They emphasized yet again the game was done, both content and gameplay wise, but more time was necessary with balancing the game and fixing a plethora of bugs. CDPR would face backlash with this delay announcement. Finally, to June 25th, CD Projekt Red would hold its first of 5 live-streamed Night City Wire episodes, which included new gameplay, interviews, and details on Cyberpunk 2077. Shortly after the first episode, journalists from around the world published new interviews with CDPR developers, and for the first time, hands-on previews of the game, finally being able to play Cyberpunk 2077 for 4 to 5 hours on PC. The impressions were again overwhelmingly positive, with some criticism being centered around the bugs, melee combat, and driving mechanics. With interviews though, a variety of new gameplay mechanics were revealed and detailed, such as the fact that players would be able to go on GTA-like rampages if they wished to. But CDPR developers also confirmed that wall running had been scrapped due to design reasons, vehicle customization had also been scrapped along with the subway system, which was featured quite a bit in the game's debut trailer but was now gone. The Flathead Spider Bot was intended to be an AI companion that players could use in combat, but that feature also is seemingly scrapped, with Flathead now limited to its use in the main story. On September 18th, following Night City Wire Episode 3 in a post-show interview conducted by Twitch Gaming, CDPR's senior quest designer confirmed that Cyberpunk 2077's main story would be slightly shorter than The Witcher 3.
We do know that the main story run in Cyberpunk 2077 is slightly shorter than Witcher 3 because we got a lot of complaints about Witcher 3's main story just being too long. And looking at the metrics, you see tremendous numbers of people played through that game really far, but never made it to the end. We want you to see this whole story. So we did shorten the main story, but we have lots to do. And in terms of a completionist campaign, I just don't have that number.
It's probably not very shocking, but many gamers were disappointed by this news and also wanted to know who criticized the length of The Witcher 3, but just a number of days later it was revealed in a report by Bloomberg that CD Projekt Red was going into overdrive. The studio was reneging on what they had said previously about crunch, with CDPR studio head Anna Badowski announcing mandatory 6-day work weeks for the development team up until launch. Badowski knew the internet and games media would be outraged and pissed by the change, telling staff in an email that "I take it upon myself to receive the full backlash for this decision." On October 5th, Cyberpunk 2077 would officially go gold, essentially meaning the game was completed enough to be sent off to be printed onto discs. Going gold doesn't have the importance that it once had in this industry, as video game companies nowadays continue work prior to launch day and typically significant day one patches to iron out any bugs or issues that remain. So development on Cyberpunk 2077 continued. On October 9th, Game Informer's Liana Rupert published a conflicting report to Bloomberg's on the crunch happening at CD Projekt Red. Rupert claimed from multiple CDPR sources that most developers supported the idea of working an extra day to get the game out on time. Bloomberg's Jason Schreier would respond by calling Game Informer's report quote-unquote nonsense. It would include as evidence an email studio head Anna Badowski had sent to developers' families and partners a few months prior, which apologized for all the overtime that they were doing. A day later, on October 10th, an anonymous CD Projekt Red developer verified to be real by Bloomberg's Jason Schreier would take to the r/game subreddit and expose Cyberpunk 2077's development. They would reveal there is a lack of communication within CD Projekt Red, in which developers have found out that the game was being delayed and or going gold through Twitter. This developer also alleged that many departments had been working weekends and 16-hour days since June of 2019. They then warned that the game was being rushed out the door by management and it was not ready. Specifically, they wrote, "Day one patch is most likely going to be quite quite massive. The game was rushed and the announcement of gold came as a surprise for most of the team. It is unlikely the game will be 100% done and polished, even including the day one patch. The game would easily need at least 4 to 5 more months of work, counting crunch. The technology behind the game is not bad. Actually, the rendering and engine lighting teams did a great job and the visual quality is quite high, although the red engine is a bit mangled. The game is not terrible, technically speaking, but it could have used more time to be properly shipped. And then they continued, the studio is confident the game will be well received. Overall, Cyberpunk is coming out to be a great game. What's frustrating is that given a bit more time and better planning, it could have came out as a masterpiece without anyone doing crunch. Just a couple of weeks later, CD Projekt Red shocked the gaming world once again by delaying Cyberpunk 2077 from November 19th to December 10th. Delaying the game after announcing that it had gone gold was a bold move, one that brought enormous outrage and even some threats against CDPR staff. People were pissed. In their statement announcing the new delay, CDPR's executives apologized but said that their priority was having the game running smoothly on all platforms that Cyberpunk 2077 was available on, and they believed the additional 21 days would help make that possible. Besides the public's anger, investors were also growing concerned. Rumors had been floating about that the current gen versions of Cyberpunk 2077 caused the latest delay, so in an emergency call with investors the day after this delay announcement, CDPR's executives basically admitted that the current gen versions of the game needed more work. One investor did ask if there were problems with the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 versions of the game, in which a CDPR executive responded by downplaying the issues. I wouldn't say there is a problem because there's nothing wrong with the Xbox or PlayStation 4 versions, there's optimization to be handled. Also, because of how we're approaching things from the get-go in terms of development, so there is no problem with the Xbox or PlayStation 4, to be honest. A month later, on November 25th, in the next investor call, CDPR's executives would again discuss the performance of Cyberpunk 2077 on the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 hardware. CEO Adam Kaczynski, when asked how the game runs on the base models of the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, saying, "Of course, a bit lower than on Pros, but surprisingly good. I would say for such a huge world. So, bit lower, but very good, that's the answer." And he would continue later, adding that we had those extra 3 weeks, and we achieved a lot by within this final stretch. So we believe that the game is performing great on every platform, of course according to platform capabilities, but not every platform should be great. Cyberpunk 2077 would officially release to the world on December 10th, 2020. The wait was finally over, but what would follow would probably be considered CD Projekt Red and many fans' worst nightmare because Cyberpunk 2077 was just not ready. The game clearly was rushed and barely playable on consoles, with widespread issues being reported, with some players suffering dozens upon dozens of crashes, drastic FPS drops, game-breaking bugs, and many more problems. Even many PC players were having a difficult time playing at launch. But now we arrive to a few huge questions. Like, even with these problems, is Cyberpunk 2077 worth it? Did CDPR deliver a great gaming experience? After waiting for 8 years, is this a true next generation of open-world gaming title, as has been described in marketing? And to answer all of those questions with a simple response, it depends on your hardware. It depends on what you expected, and it just depends. Cyberpunk 2077 is truly an interesting and unique experience crafted by a beast of a company, one that this entire gaming industry should study and learn from. The beast that entered the jungle from the bottom and slowly grew year after year. Finally, the beast exploded in popularity and trust by delivering one of the greatest consumer-friendly AAA games ever made, but those around the beast questioned if they could keep the success going, if they could set the bar once again. Cyberpunk 2077 had enormous expectations because it was made out to be a giant leap in gaming, the next revolutionary, innovative step forward, and it's really just not that. It's a phenomenal game that surprised me because it's really so different than what I had imagined. Fortunately, I can say that this game shines bright when it comes to delivering an engaging narrative, rich characters, thrilling music, action-packed combat, and one of the best-looking open-world games ever. Night City can feel so immersive until you stare at it a little too long, and admittingly, I didn't really do that too much in my first number of hours because I was so invested into learning more about the man in my head or the nomad girl that's thicker than a bowl of oatmeal. Goddamn, Pan Am. But the most significant issue with Cyberpunk 2077 2077 is the fact that recommending this game depends largely on where you plan to play it, because if your answer is last-gen consoles, it has to be a no right now. After 130 plus hours of playing this game, I had an enjoyable time on a high-end PC, but this game is an absolute painful mess on my Xbox One S. It legit hurts my head playing the game on that console because of the constant FPS drops, blurry textures, crashes, and endless amounts of bugs. Besides the night and day difference between Cyberpunk 2077's performance on an Xbox One versus PC, the game does have baffling fundamental issues, such as an in-game economy that's pretty unbalanced. Really, the whole game is unbalanced, but some of the worst NPC AI I've seen in the last decade of gaming, a police or wanted system that makes zero sense, driving mechanics that feel just fine at best, a lack of basic physics with things such as water and vehicle damage, as well as the feeling that a large portion of this game was cut and it's not here. I guess an argument could be made that a lot of the issues Cyberpunk 2077 suffers from are the same issues that we had with The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, such as the brain-dead NPC AI. Even despite those shortcomings, people love that game. Although the counter-argument would be that we hope for developers, especially ones setting out to bring the next generation of open-world gaming, well, we hope for them to learn from their mistakes and continue to improve and evolve in areas where there was visible weakness. Now, let's start from the top with the first choice we are presented with, and that being our life path. As this is an RPG, you have to design or well choose the background of your very own V. So you can either be a street kid who's just returning back to Night City from Atlanta, or a nomad who's left his clan, the Backers, behind and looks for new opportunity in Night City, or the Corpo, being an agent of megacorporation Arasaka and being tasked with a difficult objective. Each of these life paths carry exclusive dialogue options throughout, as well as a few exclusive side quests. Now, unfortunately, the way that Cyberpunk 2077 is structured, it's that each of these life paths have about a 30-minute exclusive starting point, then just everything meets. The game then skips ahead by 6 months, in which V has been living and getting comfortable in the Watson district for some time. In the grand scheme of things, though, that choice you make at the start does not really matter too much. In the main story, or the more detailed side jobs, you won't miss out on any content, but what you will gain or miss is relatability with characters. Being a nomad, your conversations just feel a lot better with Pan Am and the Aldecados. Being a corpo, you better understand Goro Takamura. And in Cyberpunk 2077, relationships are everything. Now, in terms of replayability with tons of different routes and ways of going about things with picking another life path, that isn't really here. I've played all 3 of these life paths for a number of hours, and it doesn't feel different enough. The exclusive dialogue options don't change things up all that much or at all. On the Nomad life path, I think there is maybe 1 or 2 exclusive side quests, and they were over pretty fast. Each life path does have a few side jobs which carry an additional option. So for example, the only way to get out of one encounter without bullets flying is by being a street kid and using the street kid dialogue option. But that's as far as the complexity goes. In the main story, or the side jobs that branch into the main story, there's no additional options available for that choice that you made at the start. It was emphasized pre-release by CDPR the replayability of this game. This was mainly the response to people's concerns over the game's length being quote-unquote slightly shorter than The Witcher 3, which is actually just a lot shorter than I had expected. But that life path choice, at least in terms of main story options and choices, is not important. You won't be getting a very different game if you choose a Nomad or Corpo. Now, the next step in Cyberpunk 2077 after you pick your life path is creating the ultimate V. The character creator has a variety of options available, like you can change your eyes, your dong size, hairstyle, skin tone, nails, body tattoos, teeth, voice tone, piercings, lip makeup, blemishes, and so on and so forth. Although I do kind of wish that there had been a head sculpting option, or really the ability to choose a head type, rather than having to spam the randomized preset option to find something that I liked. For what it's worth though, customizing your junk was strictly for marketing. It serves no purpose or is at all seen in the game except when the game bugs out or on the inventory screen. That's it. But in terms of starting decisions, picking to have a male or female body does have huge ramifications, more so than the life path choice. Certain romances are locked out depending on the body choice that you make, and characters do react and talk differently to male or female V. Next, after the life path choice and customizing our character, comes our introduction to the attribute system. You have 7 points to invest at the start, and depending on what type of build you're going for, this does matter. Body deals with your physical health and power, as well as proficiency with LMGs, shotguns, and blunt weapons. Intelligence is for hacking. Reflexes deals with maneuverability and movement speed, as well as your proficiency with rifles, handguns, and blades. Technical ability is for opening doors, crafting, and tech weapons. Last but not least, cool is all about stealth. Depending on how many points you have in each stat, it will open or close those dialogue options. So for example, if you wish to get into the Animals Club, you either pay up, or if you've invested enough points into the body attribute, you can intimidate your way in. Another example is when Judy Alvarez starts explaining some of her work, and you have the option to jump in with your technical knowledge if you have enough points in the tech attribute. Besides dialogue, your attributes do matter in missions or jobs, especially in gigs, in which you'll be able to go about things differently. An intelligent V can turn off all traps or robots or cameras that are ahead, or really just eliminate all enemies ahead. A technical V can have doors open up easily. A strong V, heavily invested in their body, can rip open an entrance. Then a V with reflexes can run and gun his way into an enemy outpost or location. A stealthy V can easily sneak past guards and or take them out quietly. Now, as is the case with most games of this genre, these attributes serve as the top of the game's skill tree. Under each attribute are the actual skills. There are 12 in total, each attribute has at least 2. Then within each skill, we have about 20 or so perks that can be unlocked. During my Nomad V playthrough, the attribute that I upgraded most was reflexes, and within that attribute I upgraded both my assault and handgun skill constantly, acquiring a majority of each skill's perks. For example, within the assault skill I drastically improved my overall damage, critical chance, aim down sight speed, critical damage, headshot damage, reload speed, recoil, and range of these types of weapons by acquiring and upgrading most of the skill's perks. It's only possible to do this by upgrading the reflexes attribute level to its maximum of 20, as most of the better perks in each skill has a level requirement. So because in my Nomad V playthrough I invested heavily into reflexes and not so much with tech ability, only having 8 attribute points in it, within tech's engineering skill, perks like insulation, which grants immunity to shock, cannot be acquired, as I need that attribute level to be at least 14, or the Blade Runner perk, which increases damage to robots by 20%, again cannot be acquired as I need an attribute level of 9. So essentially, the more you upgrade each attribute, the more perks you will unlock. Now, what's actually pretty neat is that each skill has another layer of progression, and that's based on how much you use it and also what your attribute level is. In the bottom left hand corner of each skill, you can see how far you've progressed and also see the rewards, which sometimes are perk points and sometimes specific gameplay advantages to that skill. Overall, I found this skill system quite enjoyable and can definitely see lots of fun with different builds. Investing into the tech ability means great potential with crafting. Once you unlock under the crafting skill the Edge Runner Artisan perk, which I believe you have to have a tech ability of 18, iconic weapons that you found earlier that typically are obtained at a rare or epic rarity then can be upgraded to legendaries, which come with a new appearance and are just extremely overpowered, no matter what difficulty you're on. Investing into intelligence means deadly hacking ability. Once you unlock under the quick hacking skill a perk like Bartmos's Legacy and are able to craft legendary quick hacks, you're essentially unstoppable when using quick hacks like Contagion. Now, in terms of overall gameplay, there's been a lot of discussion and curiosity on whether or not CDPR could nail this aspect. In The Witcher 3, I found gameplay pretty fun. It wasn't great, but it was a good time learning how to go about fighting different monsters, whether that be using specific magical signs or utilizing certain potions, or simply using my silver sword and dodging enemy attacks. With Cyberpunk 2077 though, I found it a lot more engaging. Gunplay really starts off slow, and that is by design. As you level up specific skills or use specific weapons, you'll see and feel gunplay improve. By the end of my Nomad V playthrough, in which I had reached the level cap of 50, reloading and aiming down sights was super fast, and unlocking certain skills in Cyberware allowed me to slide into a fight with slowed down time and get off the first shots. Then taking advantage of my double jump Cyberware, I could easily traverse the environment around me, picking off each enemy one by one. Fortunately, all of the guns at our disposal feel great. We have handguns, assault rifles, sniper rifles, SMGs, LMGs, and shotguns. Then these weapons are further divided into 3 categories: power weapons that can ricochet bullets, tech weapons that have charged shots, and smart weapons which lock onto enemies. We can customize each of our weapons with new attachments with a different scope or muzzle. Then there is a weapon mod slot which adds gameplay boosts such as upping your critical damage or eliminating vertical recoil. This weapon customization could have been better fleshed out in my opinion. Like an option to change your magazine size would have been great, a flashlight mod to actually see in the dark would have been nice. As is the case with all gear in the game, there are 5 rarities in Cyberpunk 2077. Gray represents common, green is uncommon, blue is rare, purple is epic, and orange is legendary. Making your way through a combat encounter, you'll be overwhelmed by enemies dropping tons of guns that you can loot, but most of the time this is all kind of worthless, especially in the later part of the game. Picking up these guns, no matter the rarity, except maybe of course legendaries, have one good use, and that is scrapping it for parts. The guns that I found myself constantly using were iconic ones, which essentially are unique or special weapons that you'll unlock if you explore a loot during a mission. And as I said earlier, crafting an upgraded version of these iconic weapons just makes them extremely overpowered. The Widowmaker, a tech precision rifle, was my go-to gun. It was powerful, it could shoot through walls. Skippy, the talking smart gun, was also a pleasant deadly surprise. Comrade's hammer is a single bullet until it has to be reloaded tech revolver, which just obliterates enemies. One of my favorite handguns is Crash, the power revolver, which thanks to investing in the skill tree and acquiring expensive mods, I had a laundry list of bonus effects and was easily killing enemies with a single shot to the head. The 05 sniper rifle was one that I acquired thanks to passing a skill check during a side mission, and is again a gun with a list of extra effects, including adding explosive tips to the rifle's bullets. The M251S Ajax is probably the lone non-iconic weapon that I've used quite a bit. This legendary power assault rifle is one that was acquired for a hefty sum from a vendor, and one of the effects it has is lighting sometimes enemies on fire. Ultimately though, all of these weapons feel great, especially the 05 sniper rifle, in which you can feel and hear the force of shooting a single bullet off. Then when you go to reload, you have a beautiful detailed animation. Really, I think CDPR did a superb job with the guns of Night City. With melee weaponry, this is also another area of combat that I found great fun with. There's nothing better than slicing and dicing Tiger Claw's gang members into pieces with a katana, or smashing heads with a golden baseball bat. As is the case with guns, the most useful melee weapons are iconic ones. Cottonmouth is a one-handed club which comes with a chance to poison enemies, as well as chemical and electrical damage, and actually when you strike some enemies you can see the bolts zap through their bodies. The Jinchu Maru is a katana which benefits from you using the Kerenzikov cyberware, which slows time, and when that's active you gain 100% critical chance. I suppose if there is one criticism I have for melee weapons, it's the fact that I really dislike doing any of this in first person. This becomes more of an issue with fist fighting, but when you're surrounded by 15 enemies, swords or fists, it just doesn't feel smooth enough going from one attacker to the next. Now, fist fighting in general is something that I feel very mixed on. This aspect of the combat is good really only when utilizing the gorilla arms, especially because most NPCs just can't seem to block in the open world, which leads to some hilarious powerful punches, which can send enemies flying a good 25 feet or so in the air. But really the problem with fist fighting gets exposed in the Beat of the Brat fist fighting minigame missions, in which the first 2 or so fights are a piece of cake, but after that, doing simple things like blocking or dodging doesn't seem to matter, which maybe that's a bug, or maybe not, but the last Beat of the Brat mission is beyond frustrating, solely because I wish there was that option of a third-person camera view so I could properly dodge and move around. I guess beating up enemies with my fists is a good time in a lot of the non-fighting minigame missions because I'm nearly indestructible, and there really isn't much of a challenge, and that is a theme throughout the gameplay experience. Cyberpunk 2077 is a very easy game, no matter the difficulty that you're on. Of course, the boss fights in this game aren't always a cakewalk, but outside of that, usually your biggest threat to dying is accidentally blowing up a gas canister next to you. But another aspect of gameplay or combat is our cyberware. I've already mentioned gorilla arms, but we also have mantis blades, monowire, and projectile launch system, which are all ARM cyberware and the only ones that seemingly alter V's appearance. These 4 pieces of cyberware can be rotated out by visiting a Ripper dock, and each provide a specific gameplay advantage and act as another weapon. Mantis blades is essentially like having dual swords in your arms. Gorilla arms gives you overpowered punches which can send enemies flying. Monowire is essentially a wire that sticks out of your arm that can be used to strike enemies with, and the projectile launch system is a hand cannon that fires off projectiles like missiles from your arms. Each of these pieces of cyberware have mods that can be installed which alter its appearance and or add some extra gameplay changes to the weapon. Like with mantis blades, changing the blades out, you can go from normal physical blades to thermal to electrical blades. Although with with gorilla arms, you can also change the knuckles from physical to thermal to chemical, but I guess you don't really see the appearance change at least that much. Now, these aren't the only cyberware mods available, as like guns and melee weapons, there are mods that can improve things like critical damage. Overall, these pieces of cyberware are just fine. I didn't really have as much fun as I would have hoped with them. Like, I actually wish that their initial uses like monowire for hacking and mantis blades for climbing on walls would have been left in the final version, but obviously things changed during development. Now, with the entire cyberware system, this acts very Deus Ex-like, and there's a variety of cyberware that you can make use of for each of the body parts that fit to your playstyle, and actually depending on your attribute levels, you'll either unlock or be locked out of certain cyberware. So, because my cool attribute level is so low, I cannot acquire any of the good immune system cyberware. Now, as I said before, cyberware brings tons of advantages. Installing Kerenzikov in my nervous system allows me to aim and shoot while dodging, but it also slows time by 90% for 3.5 seconds when I block, aim, or attack during a slide or dodge. In my integumentary system, I have fireproof coating, which grants immunity to burn. My legs have reinforced tendons, which allow me to double jump and really take advantage of traversing Night City, Mirror's Edge style. It really is a missed opportunity that they didn't make more use of the excellent parkour mechanics with either a minigame or just something. My skeleton has synaptic signal optimizer, which increases my health by 50%, as well as micro rotors, which increases attack speed by 25%. Frontal cortex has visual cortex support, which increases critical damage by 30%. The ocular system, which also has mod slots, is where we can upgrade our Kuroshi optics. And yes, like all gear, there are rarities to cyberware, with the legendaries or epics being locked behind specific attribute levels and being harder to come by in terms of price and where to find them. Every Ripper Duck has different inventory and usually have a specific body part that features more options compared to others. The final part of our cyberware system that I have not touched on is our operating system, in which we have the option to utilizing a Cyberdeck, Syndevistan, or the Berserk. All of these can be further customized with mods. Pretty much Berserk, when activated, is for those focused on either guns or melee combat and gives a huge boost in a number of categories, such as your strength, weapon recoil, armor, melee damage, stamina, health, and more. Syndevistan, when activated, slows down time for a number of seconds and gives players a boost in things like critical chance or damage. Then there is our Cyberdeck, which is for hacking. This is a lot more detailed and extensive than the other two, the only one that I used and upgraded. Our Cyberdeck is huge and decides the types of quick hacks that we can conduct. We can obtain new quick hacks by either looting, crafting, or visiting a Netrunner merchant to buy new ones. Also, as you might expect, common Cyberdecks pale in comparison to legendaries, which feature more quick hack slots that we can customize to our liking, and additional quick hack gameplay advantages like reducing the cooldown or time it takes to upload a quick hack. Often I found myself using the overheat quick hack, which applies deadly thermal damage to an enemy. Reboot optics is great for stealth or silent takedowns, as it for a short period of time turns off the enemy's sight. Probably the most deadly of all the quick hacks is Contagion, which deals poison to a target that can then spread to other nearby enemies. Then there is the Ping quick hack, which reveals enemy and devices connected to the local network. This was key in finding access points, which are locations that allow us to jack in and hack them. Doing so unlocks the Breach Protocol minigame, which comes with a variety of rewards as long as we solve the puzzle in time. Of all the minigames on Cyberpunk 2077, this was the one I found myself most invested into, as it's not just eddies that you'll get in return, you also get legendary and epic crafting components. Now, another aspect of customizing our very own V is our gear, which can be changed out in our inventory screen. Just like with weapons, gear plays a big role not just for armor, but because of some of the higher end items such as different masks, pants, or jackets have mod slots as well, which can improve carrying capacity, critical damage, and your ability to evade attacks. None of this is very far from what we had in The Witcher 3, and again, I found this aspect of customizing V quite enjoyable. I do find it surprising that there isn't a glove option for our upper body though, which seems like a missed opportunity. I do think the reason why clothing doesn't have drastically different base effects and is limited to solely armor and the mod slots is because CDPR wanted players to make their characters look however they wanted, and then they could take advantage of the Armadillo mod with any piece of gear, which can increase armor by like 200. But the issue with this system is the fact that you have to have a piece of gear in each of the slots or you miss out on potential armor points and gameplay benefits. And I'm going to be honest, I really hate most of the hats in this game and I would prefer just to not have to wear one. So I do think that there should have been an option to have like a helmet in the head slot or maybe even a jacket in the upper body slot, but the option to turn off the appearance. Next though, we move move to the side missions within Cyberpunk 2077. Whenever you take on any of these or take part in the open world, you improve your street cred, which unlocks new unique items, vendors, and more. This is one of the advantages of taking on side content, as you'll unlock certain types of cyberware and other pieces of gear that is reserved for those who have made a mark on Night City. Now, one of the biggest pieces of content is gigs, which are basically jobs given from fixers. Whenever you get near a gig, knowingly or unknowingly, fixers will call you up and fill you in on what you need to do. These missions really take advantage of how you've built your character and sometimes have side objectives of doing the job quietly, in which you can gain a bonus reward. The penalty for not is usually a phone call from the fixer in which they state their disappointment, but you don't miss out on or have the job's normal reward cut. Most of the time you're either stealing an item or saving someone and the gig is over in minutes. But there are a few that surprised me, like one guy I helped rewarded me later with a car he didn't need, another was having me to investigate what happened to a woman and pick up a data shard, to only find out that the woman tried helping out her sister who was suffering from cyberpsychosis, let her move in, and eventually killed her. Then another gig seemed like your typical steal item objective, but as I made my way through the level, there was no enemies or traps until I reached a door, which a tense encounter followed with a veteran who was suffering. We both had our guns pointed at each other. I told him what I needed. He was clearly sick with, I believe, cyberpsychosis and abandoned by everyone. He wanted to take it out on a politician. Passing a skill check, I calmed him down. He let me take the item that I needed, and as I walked away, a gunshot went off in the background. Even outside of Cyberpunk 2077's main story and side jobs, there's just phenomenal and deep writing all around. Now, besides gigs, we have NCPD scanner hustles, assaults in progress, and reported crimes, which are more or less just clearing out a number of enemies. Cyberpsychosis sightings are essentially boss fights. There's 17 of them in total, and a couple of others that aren't listed. Again, there is story behind this, with Fixer Regina Jones requesting that we don't kill any of these enemies after we defeat them. These encounters also guarantee valuables, whether that be a large sum of Eurodollars or legendary gear, which makes them quite useful. Mini games in Cyberpunk 2077 are labeled as side jobs, as there is narrative behind them. There's a couple of street races, a couple of fist-fighting matches, a couple of shooting competitions, and that's about it. None of these activities you can do again, which is rather disappointing. This is in no way or shape like a Rockstar Games open world, in which you can go bowling with your cousin, or lift some weights, or go golfing, or play tennis, or gamble, or whatever. It's very straightforward and limited. There is no game within a game like was the case with The Witcher 3's Gwent. So once you finish the narrative content, that's really about it, besides countless criminals that you can eliminate. Now, actually, let's get into the main meat that this game has to offer with these side jobs. Of course, we have the mini games that fall into this category, but we also have storylines here that tackle disturbing themes, and some of them impact the main story. Like with The Witcher 3, these side stories is where the game shines. We have some hilarious ones, like hearing the rambles of a conspiracy theorist and choosing to encourage him or not, meeting up with a corpo agent just to find out how much of a freak they are. Well, you know, the good freaky type, if you catch what I'm trying to say. Then there's one in which Max Tax shows up and questions me after an event happens. A vending machine that talks puzzles my V because he can't tell if he's truly sentient or not. Walking into a meeting between nomads and scavs exchanging product seems just about to blow up with the scavs ready to screw over the nomads, but because of the reputation that I have in Night City and picking the right dialogue options, I can intimidate and make the scavs fearful of acting out of line in my presence, which is what happens and really gives you that feeling that you are a badass in the city. Near V's apartment, you can talk and help your neighbor out of a difficult life situation in which he is depressed. Another is being hired by a politician and uncovering some horrifying realities with no clear or good outcome. Probably one of the best in the game, though, is to do with religion, a man's past sins, and the question of whether or not anyone deserves forgiveness no matter if they have changed. Like I said, these side jobs are great, and I could go on and on about the other ones, like the storyline with Delamain, which has us having to help rogue AIs with unique personalities and feelings about life. CDPR has without a doubt one of the best writing teams in gaming. That is quite clear after seeing everything that Cyberpunk 2077 has to offer. Now, there's a reason why I didn't mention the more story-heavy side jobs, because I don't consider them as that. If you want the full Cyberpunk 2077 experience, I just think that it's necessary to complete the side story arcs of characters like River Ward, Pan Am Palmer, Judy Alvarez, and Rogue. These side stories or narrative arcs revolve around V working with another character. This is where relationships and romances come into play. Cyberpunk 2077 features probably my favorite romance I've seen in a game ever, and it's not at all because these characters bang, but because they feel so connected. That is the one that you can obtain with Pan Am Palmer. It just feels authentic and real by the way that relationship grows over time until she eventually cares and feels concerned for V. Within this last year, I've seen other developers tackle romances with a typical, "Hey, I've always loved you." "Well, me too, let's kiss," and then the screen fades to black. Now when you pass the character, you can kiss them and get the fade to black screwing screen. Oh, and the dialogue will change to them referring to you as their love. It just feels so contrived and unrewarding. I truly think this industry struggles with making love work in video games. Of course, father-daughter relationships or even mother-daughter love has worked, but in terms of players feeling like two characters are connected and feel in love with each other, it just rarely works for me. But in Cyberpunk 2077, it does. Even besides romancing Panam, the actual missions involving her and her family is a fun time. It was also amazing, almost acting like a detective with River Ward as we try to solve a disturbing mystery, or working with Judy to find out the horrifying truth about what happened to a friend of hers. These stories also don't end right there. Once we solve the crime or uncover the truth or find whatever we need to find, we see the aftermath and can truly understand, learn, and build a relationship with these characters. There are just moments where this game slows down at the perfect time to really grab your attention and invest you into the moment. While I am giving a lot of praise to CDPR's writing, praise does have to go to the actors and their performances. From Panam Palmer to Wakako Okada to Jackie Wells to Kerry Eurodyne to Saul Bright to Adam Smasher to Victor Vector to Misty to Goro Takamura to Yorinobu Arasaka, and so on and so forth. Everyone does a good job bringing their characters to life, especially Keanu Reeves as Johnny Silverhand. Early on in the game's main story, he finds his way into our head, and I felt Keanu nailed the a-hole rocker boy attitude. Of course, it isn't perfect, but once you start taking on side jobs and exploring the open world, Johnny's presence and added thoughts on random subjects feels more than satisfactory. By the end of my Nomad V playthrough, I had the ultimate bromance with Johnny, and I truly understood him as a character, seeing how he has evolved and changed with time. Now, there is one more character I have not talked about, and that is Night City. Yes, the open world certainly acts as one, as characters constantly describe and talk about the city as if it's a person. Night City is an interesting beast because it is by far an impressive open world space, making great use of ray tracing and lighting effects, but Night City is separated into districts, each having their own distinct look, with the luxurious and rich Westbrook, factories and poverty dominate Watson, city center features crowds of people walking nearby multiple skyscrapers including Arasaka's headquarters, Haywood is a mixed bag of beautiful parks and apartments to the north, while to the south it's dominated by dangerous and unwelcoming slums. Santo Domingo has been exploited over and over again by corporations, leaving behind tons of desperation and poverty, while Pacifica is basically a war zone. All of Night City has giant billboards that mostly use sexualization to advertise and sell products. The streets are full of garbage and debris scattered about. Really, the environmental artists at CDPR did a phenomenal job with making the city feel lively. But here is where we get to the big issue with Night City. Much of this lively open world is superficial. You'll see NPCs doing yoga, carrying boxes, sitting for a beer, another playing the guitar, a couple having a conversation, tons of uniquely dressed people walking around, and so on and so forth. But when you go up to these NPCs or follow them around, they either go nowhere or they despawn. It's immersion breaking, getting into a gunfight or shooting a bullet in the air, moving the camera away from crowds of NPCs, and then they all just instantly despawn. I don't think this needs to be Red Dead Redemption 2 in terms of NPC interactions, which certainly has set the bar for this industry, but the system in place for Cyberpunk is beyond dated and just broken. Shoot someone's car or hit it with a baseball bat in Grand Theft Auto 4, sometimes the NPC will get out and fight or shoot you or threaten you. Here in Cyberpunk, it's a recycled animation of them always running away. Weirdly enough also, almost never were gangs or police ever driving cars, which just comes off as strange. Night City's water has zero physics, cars have limited physics, and can only barely receive damage. When you commit a crime in Night City, police immediately spawn on top of you. Another example of immersion breaking, there are various restaurants and bars and none of them you can sit at and eat. Vehicles have zero AI, so if you leave your car in the street, they don't have the intelligence to move around. If you get into a car and beep your horn, NPCs just won't react or do anything. The NPC AI is so bad that they will run away for just about any reason, like if V jumps on something or aims his gun into the air. What's even more frustrating is sometimes I would come upon people having a conversation. Then if I sat there and waited and listened in, these NPCs would just stare at one another, doing absolutely nothing forever once their conversation concluded. Night City's NPCs and liveliness are an illusion. I think really the issue is that CDPR is over-relying on scripted moments, and they have not invested enough time into developing AI for basic things that I think everyone just expected would be in this game, considering that this is supposed to be the next generation of open-world gaming, which it's not. The 2018 gameplay demo with scavengers ambushing V led me to believe that there would be random moments like that, which would pop up as we make our way through Night City, but that just never happens. Maybe my expectations were just too high in that respect, but I truly expected the open world formula to be shaken up a bit, with NPCs finding us sometimes for whatever reason. But again, none of this ever happens. Now outside of Night City, I do have to say that the Badlands feels very disappointing. We've seen developers like Obsidian with Fallout New Vegas make a desert work well, but in Cyberpunk 2077 the Badlands just feels extremely empty and quite dull, with much of the land looking copy and pasted with little to do or explore. The best thing is really admiring the beauty of Night City from afar, as everything looks so detailed. Now, driving is another area that I feel disappointed by. I've already mentioned the lack of collision physics and driving AI, but more often than not, I found myself fast traveling everywhere. Driving in Cyberpunk 2077 is not great. The vehicles look pretty solid, the interiors are extremely detailed, but how most of them control just feels off. Specifically with turning, it feels painful with almost every vehicle in the game. The one saving grace for vehicles are the motorbikes, which I actually did enjoy. They still have issues like the lack of being able to move them mid-air, and turning still feels awful, but I did have a great time cruising through the daytime streets of Kabuki. However, I do think vehicle features are far too limited here. Like, CDPR should have had an option to zoom out of the minimap when driving, and being able to turn on headlights would have been great, especially when you're exploring dark tunnels or locations. Next, let's touch on audio design.
Yeah, this would make for a decent little motel, wouldn't it? Little fireplace, booze. Grumpy guy at reception is the one thing missing.
Have everything you need, man.
I couldn't ask for more.
Ma'am, I'm sure you'd be cozier with your shoes off.
After a full day in them, I'd fear a health code violation.
Nonsense. After a day as full as today, you deserve to kick back.
Oh? And what did you have in mind?
No way, not either.
Rip up the shreds!
Without a doubt, Cyberpunk 2077 has some of the best music and sound effects I've ever heard in gaming. The entire score is tremendous. Weapon effects sound great, the city sounds amazing with all kinds of different noises being thrown at your ears. I absolutely love the use of music in some of the critical narrative moments. It really enhanced the scenes and properly emphasized the magnitude of moments. When getting into combat sequences, often combat-themed tracks would play to further intensify these encounters, and I felt it worked great. There's even one Cyber Psycho mission that has a horror vibe to it, and I felt the music really set the tone for what was happening. So all around, I think that this is one of the absolute highlights of Cyberpunk 2077. Finally though, let's next discuss the main story of Cyberpunk 2077. One of the biggest surprises of this game was how much marketing gave me a false perception of what would go down. That's both a good and bad thing, but those early hours in Cyberpunk 2077 definitely leads to some shocking revelations, such as Jackie and T-Bug's deaths, as well as Yorinobu killing Saburo Arasaka, which eventually has the famous rocker boy Johnny Silverhand in our head, and we do get to play through parts of his past, which led to him being screwed around with by megacorporation Arasaka. The whole story of this game has V getting closer and closer to death because of Johnny Silverhand being in his head, and needing to get him out. That's pretty much it, that's the story. It's very straightforward and far shorter than The Witcher 3, but really making the most of the main storyline is dependent on the player taking part in Night City, and the many side jobs. Not just V's romance with a character like Pan Am Palmer, but also the ones ones that give Johnny control, allowing him to become a drunken mess at a nightclub or a date night with a lover from his past, or coming to terms with Alt being gone and the mistakes he made with their relationship, or jamming with his old bandmates, or discovering the truth about some things that happened after he disappeared from Night City in 2023. A big part of the game's main storyline is Johnny and V's relationship changing, which is dependent on the dialogue options that you make. But after all the big side stories are done, completed, after finding out how to survive and get Johnny out of your head, this leads to a pivotal moment in which V is on the verge of death, in which he has to end it right there, which you can, or fight to survive another day by infiltrating Arasaka Towers and gaining access to Mikoshi. Now, how you go about the final mission depends on if you've completed the entirety of certain side jobs. If you rushed through the game just doing main missions, you probably finished the game in 17-ish hours, but you only have 2 or 3 endings possible. There are 7 endings in total. No matter what though, none of them have an extremely satisfying ending except for one, which is the Nomad Pan Am ending, in my opinion. This is the only one that gives hope to V, as with Johnny now out of his head, V is still left with just months to live, but he has Pan Am by his side and vows to push forward with finding a way to survive. Each of the game's endings have V in third person with music playing, as his conclusion is not definitive. In the Nomad ending, it's just a beautiful finale with V and Pan Am sitting on the giant tank, laying next to each other and heading for Arizona for a new beginning with the Aldecados. In all honesty, how CDPR saves the third person scene for this final moment works phenomenally well. But after the game's ending wraps up and the game's credits, most of the main characters you've interacted with leave you a message, and depending on the choice that you made in the game, the messages will differ. Like if you chose to off yourself, it's absolutely heartbreaking hearing the messages left by Judy or Pan Am or Victor. But after the credits conclude, the game then returns to before the final mission began, so you can take on the other content that you might have missed out on. Overall, I found the main story of Cyberpunk 2077 a good time. The actual narrative won't give you all the closure or answers that you might want, but what makes this work so well is the relationships that V has crafted, whether that be with Johnny or Pan Am or Judy, and how that factors into the concluding hours. The theme of life, death, and legacy are at the center of this story. What does it mean to just live? What does it mean to have made it? Should one fear their inevitable death or not? These are just some of the questions that Cyberpunk 2077 leaves behind for players to ponder about. Questions that both Johnny and V grapple with together, and some of the best scenes the game has to offer. But there are some issues here, such as the fact that the game's main story is supposed to be a race of survival. We see V suffering with malfunctions throughout the game, Arthur Morgan TB style. That's why the game's design and heavy focus on side jobs, or really any side activity, conflicts with the supposed urgency of V's main objective. Now, as this game is non-linear, I'm not going to go through all of the different endings or decisions that you can make in the final quest, but I will note that a lot of the choices that you're presented with in the main story do not matter much by the end. There are a few in which some characters' deaths can be prevented, which at least in one scenario alters some dialogue in the final hours, as well as another that changes up how a big side job story arc plays out, but nothing is locked out unless you choose to go about side jobs with certain characters in ways that pisses them off and doesn't allow you to complete their story arc. That's really about it, and that's actually pretty hard to do and doesn't feel worth it. So there isn't as much choice as I initially expected when I first completed the game, which does put a damper on replayability. Now though, let's next tackle one of the biggest issues with this game, and it's the sheer amount of bugs and performance issues. See, on PC, this game runs great, at least for myself on a high-end rig. On console though, it's a different story. It's absolutely insane that CDPR's management let this game release in its current state. Just some of the issues I ran into included cars spawning inside of another, quests bugging out, blurry textures, music just non-stop playing when it's not supposed to, objects not loading in, various moments of T-posing, NPCs floating in the air, NPCs disappearing and appearing right in front of you, occasional game freezes and crashes, audio for dialogue not triggering, my body bugging out on a bike, floating weapons, items not being able to be interacted with, drastic FPS drops, my hair missing in mirrors or when I get on a bike, enemies NPCs just not moving in combat or glitching around, and random deaths when falling or standing in an awkward position. But my problems do not compare to what some people have experienced.
Oh shit. He's in rough shape, but alive.
Meeting to celebrate at the afterlife. Ahí luego, V.
particular clown's got intel I need.
Wait a minute. What the blood?
As I said before, this game just was not ready, and it's disappointing that CD Projekt Red pushed this out in such a messy state. I really put my trust in them that a massive day one patch was going to fix a lot of the problems that I ran into with my review copy, but that never happened. It turned out to be worse than I could have ever imagined on console. Fortunately, some of the hotfixes that have come immediately following launch have fixed a lot of the issues that I had. Still, quite a few do remain. Now, besides the game being a buggy mess, we do need to discuss a lot of content and features that were hyped up pre-launch. Well, they just aren't here. Translator augment to understand other languages is nowhere to be found. Being able to bribe corrupt police officers doesn't seem possible. Police also will spawn in wherever you commit a crime, no matter the location. Mini games are surprisingly extremely lacking here, with nothing coming close to Gwent. The complexity of gameplay and animation teased in the E3 2018 and 48-minute gameplay demo is also gone. Maelstrom gangers playing basketball never happens. Trauma Team never appears in missions or story outside of the game's opening quest, The Rescue. Little things like shooting a scavenger in the head underwater to conceal the noise from the shot has been replaced with a repetitive chokehold and then throw the enemy's body away animation. Cyberware has also seen a downgrade. Good example is the Monowire, which had a hacking use teased in the 2019 deep dive video, and now it's strictly a melee weapon. One designer in 2019 discussed environmental challenges such as acid rain, but that doesn't seem to matter at all in the game. There was also mention to a better wanted system in 2019, one designer saying, "I would compare it to The Witcher 3, where if you chopped off the head of a villager in the middle of nowhere, the guards wouldn't show up out of nowhere," but that's exactly what happens now. It was also said that NPCs had daily routines in 2019. If you followed someone for 15 hours, you might see the same thing repeated a few times. That just is not true in the retail version. Majority of NPCs walk from here to there and then despawn. Just this past June 2020, it was said that side quests were so in-depth that you could finish the game without doing the main quest. That isn't possible in the retail version. It was also said in 2019 none of the game's open world would be locked off at the start, a designer saying, "We're not going to have this locked invisible wall where you can't go past it because we show a message on the screen saying we must go back. It doesn't make sense, right? It's like I just crossed the street. What's the issue?" So we won't have anything like that, but that is what happens in the first 6 hours being forced into staying in Watson. Some of this being scrapped is to be expected. This happens in game development, but based on really the entire structure of that 2018 48-minute gameplay demo's missions being changed in the retail version, I'm led to believe that there was significant issues that the CDPR team ran into behind the scenes. Likely it was deadlines hitting and the scope of the game having to be scaled down, which is why even despite the bugs, the game feels unfinished, like it needed another year or so of development. It just is so weird coming upon interiors that aren't finished or a railway system that looks like it was abandoned mid-development. Concept art for a luxury casino and club was posted months ago by CDPR to give players an idea for what North Oak would look like. Even developers discuss this location as if it was in the game, although the location is nowhere to be found. But it actually still is there, it's just unfinished beyond the in-game boundary of the map, which may explain why North Oak is so small because a portion of it isn't done. Still though, it is quite detailed, and I'm sure this will be introduced in eventual DLC along with other pieces of cut content, but I'm pretty sure that couldn't have been the original plan. All of this points to the dev team racing to an unrealistic deadline and having to sacrifice some of the initial ambitions they had for Night City. But to the final part of this video, just some extra notes from my time in Cyberpunk 2077. The first-person perspective choice is one that I do understand, especially in emotional story moments, but in various combat moments, I really think that third-person option should have been there. Enemy AI is very much just fine. The different enemy types also are serviceable, I guess, if not a step down from The Witcher 3. Gangs and corporations' overall importance in the game's story content is a lot less than I had expected, with not as much situations for meaningful choices to be made. Menu options offer a decent amount of customization, with being able to turn heads-up display elements on or off, as well as changing the size of subtitles. Photo mode is a really fun addition and is at least one way that makes customizing your character worth it. Joy toys are very minor in the game. In total, there's 4 of them, 2 male, 2 female, and the naughty scenes with them are 20 or so seconds of pounding happening, but nothing is really shown. There are 4 romances in total in the game. You heard my praise for them earlier on, but it definitely feels like this could have and should have been more extensive with additional options. Meredith Stout is a great example of a character that just feels kind of wasted. Brain dances feel like an underutilized features. Fixers probably call a little too often, like just way too often. Cyberware being installed, not having a unique animation is also just a weird decision or missed opportunity. The in-game economy doesn't make a whole lot of sense, like buying a 200,000 Eddy weapon mod and having a resale value of 500 Eddies doesn't add up. It's a technical achievement, the lack of loading screens and how you can go up an elevator and see the beauty of Night City. Some of the facial animations and clothing on characters, especially with ray tracing on, is just so realistic, and you can get your very own cat that resides in your apartment after you get him some food, which is actually pretty cool. Overall though, after 8 years of waiting and over 100 hours of playing Cyberpunk 2077, I can say that this game is and has been easily worth it. Cyberpunk 2077 checks off all the things that I want in a game. The story content is great, the characters feel relatable, music is phenomenal, the open world is beautiful and fun to traverse, and combat feels engaging with tons of different play styles available. Now, is this better than Red Dead Redemption 2? I don't think so. Is this better than The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt? Again, I don't think so. Is this the next step in open world gaming? Obviously not. But what this is a phenomenal experience. One of my favorites ever, just because of the exceptional writing and relationships that I felt truly invested in. Cyberpunk 2077 though is not without flaws. Flaws that I feel are here because the game was rushed out by management to make the most of the holiday season and launch of the next generation consoles, which is disappointing because one of the big promises for years was that this game was coming when it's ready, and ultimately that just was not the case. Importantly though, that's why recommending this game, at least near launch, is so difficult. If you're on PC, this can be a glorious time, but on console, it can be an absolute train wreck. There is brilliance here within Cyberpunk 2077, but because of the state of the game right now, it's not certainty that everyone will see that. On December 7th, Cyberpunk 2077 written and video reviews would go live. Although there was some weirdness here, all reviewers were subjected to NDAs, which isn't uncommon, but no actual gameplay was allowed in video reviews, just screenshots and B-roll. Also, all reviewers were given codes for PC only. Console codes were not being given out until launch day. So base Xbox One and PlayStation 4 players were going into Cyberpunk 2077 mostly dark, with no idea what to expect as no footage or impressions had been released, just the executive's remarks a few weeks prior which indicated it was surprisingly good. Initially though, reviews for Cyberpunk 2077 were overwhelmingly positive, with the main complaints being that the game was extremely buggy, although again CDPR emphasized that big patches were on the way. One issue that did stand out was the lack of an epilepsy warning, in which one reviewer suffered a major seizure because some features in the game quite literally triggered them. CDPR would apologize and work with the reviewer to fix this issue immediately. Either way, Cyberpunk 2077 on both OpenCritic and Metacritic was receiving quite a few perfect scores, with the average around a 9 out of 10. This was the strong start that the CDPR team was hoping for, as many celebrated the news on social media, but then came launch day. This is where things quickly went south. Speaking to the Financial Times on the big day, co-founder Marcin Nowinski said, "Games take time, love, and passion. Like any work of art, our business is long-term. The only thing we have is our reputation. We release games rarely, and each one is like entering a marriage. You're supposed to deliver." Nowinski furthermore would say the company was tracking internet feedback with a fever bordering on madness before starting to work on updates. Hype and anticipation was so extremely high on launch day that when Cyberpunk 2077 went live on Steam, the website crashed. It would later be revealed that the game set a new Steam record with over 1 million concurrent players for a single single-player game, beating out the 2015 record with Fallout 4, which was of just under 500,000 players. While this definitely was an achievement to be celebrated, trouble arrived once players and reviewers gained access to console versions of the game. Things quickly turned upside down on CD Projekt Red. An exciting launch became a disaster. Immediately there was uproar with the state of the game on console. Even PC had its problems. Just so many issues were being reported, the biggest being the sheer amount of crashes and FPS averaging like 15 or so on base consoles. For many it was unplayable, and many reviewers felt the same way, accusing the developer CD Projekt Red of review manipulation by concealing how the game ran on consoles until launch day. Still though, it was announced by CD Projekt Red that they had 8 million pre-orders of the game come launch day, which more than made up the development and marketing costs of Cyberpunk 2077. The news of the game's success would be dwarfed by compilations of bugs being showcased on social media by users and outrage over the fact that CDPR thought it was acceptable to put the game out in this state. On December 11th, in an email to staff, studio head Adam Badowski spoke on behalf of management, in which they took blame for this nightmarish launch. Badowski writing, "We underestimated the lengths and complexity involved to make this a reality, and still you did everything you could to deliver an ambitious special game." Badowski also announced that all employees would be still getting full bonuses. See, originally bonuses were tied to the game having a 90 Metacritic score, and Badowski in his email said that after consideration, we believe that measure is simply not fair under the circumstances. In the days following release, Cyberpunk 2077 on OpenCritic would go from a critic average of 91 out of 100, with 97% of critics recommending the game, to a critic average of 77 out of 100, with just 65% of critics recommending the game as of December 29th. The main complaint was the performance issues and boatloads of bugs. It got so bad that for the first time ever, OpenCritic put an orange warning label on the game's review page, claiming that the developer intentionally sought to hide the true state of the game on Xbox One and PlayStation 4. IGN awarded the PC version a 9 out of 10, declaring it amazing. Cyberpunk 2077 throws you into a beautiful, dense cityscape and offers a staggering amount of flexibility and how you choose to take it from there. But IGN's console review of the game says it all. Please don't play Cyberpunk 2077 on a base Xbox One or PlayStation 4. It's a shockingly bad way to experience what is a fantastic RPG on better hardware. And they awarded the game just a 4 out of 10. Many other outlets would follow with console-specific reviews, which based on Metacritic they averaged at about 55 out of 100, which is just horrendous. Users would also review bomb the game on both Metacritic's Xbox One and PlayStation 4 pages, showing their frustration over the state of the game on consoles. Bethesda Game Studios, as Fallout 76, has often been referred to as having the biggest launch disaster ever in this AAA games industry. And in the days following Cyberpunk 2077's launch, fans from the Fallout 76 subreddit celebrated and believed the game finally surpassed them, that being Cyberpunk. Again, that's what they think. CDPR's first response to this disastrous launch came in a December 14th statement from the company's executives. They apologized for the issues and admitted that they should have paid more attention to the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 console issues. They also revealed hotfixes were coming along with big patches in early 2021. Then they presented players with the option of getting refunds if they didn't want to wait for the game to improve. This is where the next big issue happens because CDPR did not contact either Sony or Microsoft or any retailers about players getting refunds. Particularly with Sony, this was a problem as Sony has a very strict, you download the game, you're not getting your money back refund policy. But because CDPR told players to ask PlayStation support for refunds, many assumed a special arrangement was in place, but this was not the case. Due to all of the outrage over Cyberpunk 2077's launch and the announcement of refunds, CD Projekt stock began to plummet, which on December 14th led to an emergency board call in which CDPR's executives had to answer to angry investors. CEO Adam Kaczynski opened the call admitting the company ignored the signals about the Xbox One and PS4 versions needing more time. Kaczynski furthermore stated that they were focused on fixing the game and even admitted that the launch disaster had caused them to lose their reputation and trust with gamers, something that they vowed to get back. Interestingly enough, with this call, the CDPR executives would push back on claims that the game was quote-unquote unplayable. CD Projekt Senior Vice President of Business Development saying in the call, "The game is playable right now. That may be an important thing to state because it's not like the game does not launch or is unplayable. I fully understand that the experience is far from satisfactory for a lot of people, and we do acknowledge that, but not playable sounds like it doesn't launch at all, which is not the case. Throughout the remainder of the call, CDPR would push off questions and concerns about future content like DLC being delayed because of this mess, but did acknowledge that there was no special refunds arranged for Cyberpunk 2077, and developers would be given rest as many were exhausted. On December 17th, CDPR's worst case scenario would happen. Cyberpunk 2077 would be removed from the PlayStation Store indefinitely, an agreement the company was forced to make with the console maker to ensure PlayStation players could get full refunds. This delisting from PSN clearly was one that CD Projekt was unhappy with, as CDPR studio head Adam Badowski was caught liking a number of tweets on Twitter that were critical of Sony's decision, one of which wondering why another game that came a few months ago, Crystal Dynamics' Marvel's Avengers, did not get the same treatment, as that too suffered an extremely buggy launch. Speculation from analysts was that CDPR pissed off Sony by not communicating their refund plans with them before announcing refunds and overwhelming their customer service with requests, thus why Sony responded so harshly. And the days to follow, Xbox, Best Buy, and GameStop would start offering full refunds, but would not go as far to remove the game from their stores. On December 18th, CDPR developers and staff reportedly ripped into management for the terrible launch during a video meeting. As Bloomberg's Jason Schreier wrote, one employee asked the board why it had said in January 2020 that the game was complete and playable when that was not true, to which the board answered that it would take responsibility. Another developer asked whether CD Projekt's directors felt it was hypocritical to make a game about corporate exploitation while expecting their employees to work overtime. The response was vague and non-committal. Despite all of this trouble, on December 23rd, it was announced by CDPR that they had sold 13 million copies of Cyberpunk 2077, and this did factor in refunds. Still, investors were disappointed by this, as market expectations was of 16.4 million copies sold. On December 24th, the first of multiple lawsuits to follow were filed against CD Projekt for misleading investors about the state of Cyberpunk 2077 before launch. This game's journey through the last 8 years is simply a story of extreme hype to huge disappointment. Still, there is hopefully a bright future ahead for this game. Already being announced by CD Projekt Red, free minor DLC is supposed to be arriving in early 2021, similar to the ones that came with The Witcher 3's release. A proper free next-gen upgrade for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series S and X players is also on the horizon, coming sometime in 2021. Then there are substantial patches announced for January and February 2021. Later in the year, hopefully the first story expansion should be released, and the hope from many is that this is as extensive as The Witcher 3 expansions. So certainly there is a lot to look forward to with Cyberpunk 2077, and the hope many have is that CDPR can turn this around No Man's Sky style. Interestingly, after Cyberpunk 2077 and its DLCs are released, the company is supposedly gearing up for an online standalone Cyberpunk game in 2022. The belief many have is that this online game will be essentially a Cyberpunk version of Grand Theft Auto Online, which really does not excite me because this makes me fearful for the future direction of this company. Still, nothing is confirmed, but after Cyberpunk 2077, it's quite clear CDPR is on thin ice, and no matter what the company announces or does next, gamers will not forget what happened here. While many, including myself, find great enjoyment with this game, it's difficult to understate how quickly the tables have turned against CDPR. All of this due to some horrible decision making from the executives. I believe in some alternate reality this game comes out in April 2021, and while there are design issues, most of the reactions are positive from critics and users. That's the reality that should have happened. That's the one that would have lived up to CDPR's promise of delivering this game when it's ready, but that didn't happen. Now we live in this sad reality in which we really have to hope things can be turned around, and even then there will be skepticism moving forward. This AAA games industry never changes and never learns. After Fallout 76, Anthem, Ghost Recon, Breakpoint, and countless other examples, you would think executives would understand delivering broken messes do not go over well with consumers, but here we are again. What's so disappointing is that this game is not bad. It's actually excellent in many respects, but tons of talented, hardworking developers' work will be overlooked by one of the biggest video game launch disasters in history. It's quite fitting that one of the game's core themes and messages is kids to never trust the corpos. Anyway, opinions on Cyberpunk 2077 seem to be a little everywhere. What do you make of the game? Do you love it, hate it, feel it's pretty good, or just okay? Was the hype and anticipation worth it at the end of the day? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video, or if you found any informative value, and make sure to follow my other social media accounts for updates on new videos. Links are always down in the description below. I'm most active on Twitter, giving opinions on news that I do not always get into video form, so do make sure to follow me over there. Also check out my Discord for all sorts of discussion on games, and again, thank you for joining. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.